I'll never forget that Tuesday afternoon. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as I stood at the counter, preparing lunch for my wife Sarah and her mother Margaret. I was carefully slicing vegetables for a salad when I heard her voice cut through the air like a knife. "You know, it's really something," Margaret said, her tone dripping with disdain. She was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine without even looking at me. "My daughter works herself to exhaustion every single day while you live at our expense." I froze. The knife in my hand stopped mid-slice. My heart pounded in my chest as the words sank in. For 3 years, I had endured Margaret's subtle jabs, her passive-aggressive comments, her disapproving looks. But this was different. This was a direct attack, loud and cruel. "Excuse me," I managed to say, turning to face her. My hands were trembling slightly. Margaret finally looked up from her magazine, her eyes cold and calculating. "Oh, don't play innocent, Daniel. Everyone knows the truth. You lost your job 6 months ago, and since then, you've been lounging around this house like some kind of parasite. My daughter pays for everything. The mortgage, the groceries, the bills. Tell me, what exactly do you contribute?" The unfairness of her accusation hit me like a physical blow. Yes, I had lost my job as a software engineer when my company downsized. Yes, Sarah had been the primary breadwinner for the past 6 months. But what Margaret didn't know, what she refused to see, was everything else I did. I woke up at 6 every morning to make Sarah breakfast. I managed all the household chores, from laundry to cleaning to grocery shopping. I spent hours every day applying for jobs, attending interviews, taking online courses to update my skills. I cooked elaborate dinners, maintained the garden, handled all the repairs around the house. I had even started a freelance web development side project that was beginning to generate some income. But to Margaret, none of that mattered. In her eyes, if I wasn't bringing home a traditional paycheck, I was worthless. "Margaret, that's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been actively looking for work. In the meantime, I'm taking care of the house and—" "Taking care of the house?" She laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "That's what you call it. Any housewife could do what you're doing. My daughter didn't marry you to become your sugar mama. She married you because she thought you were going to be a provider, a man who could support a family. Instead, look what she got." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy for months, questioning my worth, wondering if Sarah resented me. Margaret's words were like pouring salt into an already open wound. Before I could respond, Sarah walked into the kitchen. She had come home early from work, though I hadn't heard her car pull up. The expression on her face told me she had heard everything. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "What did you just say to my husband?" Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. She put on a sweet, innocent smile. "Oh, darling. I didn't hear you come in. I was just having a conversation with Daniel about—" "I heard exactly what you said," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "How dare you speak to him like that? How dare you come into our home and disrespect my husband?" I had never seen Sarah this angry at her mother before. Margaret's face went pale. "Sarah, honey, I was just being honest. Someone needs to tell him the truth. He needs to." "The truth?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You want to talk about truth, Mom? Let me tell you some truths. Daniel wakes up before dawn every single day to make sure I have a hot breakfast before work. He's applied to over 200 jobs in the past 6 months. He's taken on freelance projects that are starting to pay off. He keeps this house running so smoothly that I can focus entirely on my career without worrying about anything at home. He supports me emotionally through every stressful day at work. He's my partner, my equal, and the best husband I could ask for." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "But Sarah, he doesn't have a job." "He's not." "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "Just stop. Daniel is more of a man than most people I know, job or no job. He's resilient, he's hardworking, and he never complains. And you know what? Even if he never worked another day in his life, I would be proud to support him, just like he supported me when I was in graduate school and barely making minimum wage. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I had no idea Sarah felt this way, had no idea she had been paying attention to everything I was doing. Margaret stood up, gathering her purse. Well, I can see where your priorities lie. I raised you to have standards, Sarah. I raised you to expect more from. You raised me to be judgmental and cruel, Sarah said quietly, and those words seemed to hit Margaret harder than any of the louder ones. You raised me to value money and status over character and love. Well, I'm glad I unlearned those lessons. And until you can treat my husband with the respect he deserves, I think you should leave. Margaret's face turned red. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. As soon as she was gone, Sarah turned to me, and I saw tears streaming down her face. She crossed the kitchen and threw her arms around me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I should have shut her down months ago. I should have protected you from her comments. I held her tight, feeling the weight of 6 months of stress and self-doubt begin to lift from my shoulders. It's okay, I said softly. You stood up for me when it mattered most. We stood there in the kitchen for a long time, just holding each other. And as I held my wife, feeling her love and support wash over me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Margaret's words define me anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel worthless ever again. But I also made another decision, one that would change everything. I was going to show Margaret, and everyone else who had doubted me, exactly what I was capable of. Not out of spite or revenge, but to prove to myself that I was more than my circumstances. What I didn't know then was that one phrase I would say to Margaret would change everything. But that moment was still to come. The week after Margaret's outburst, something shifted inside me. I woke up that Wednesday morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. As I made Sarah's breakfast, scrambled eggs with chives and whole grain toast, her favorite, I reflected on everything that had happened. Sarah had been incredibly supportive. She had called her mother and made it clear that Margaret was not welcome in our home until she could apologize to me properly. Margaret predictably had doubled down, insisting she had done nothing wrong and that Sarah would come to her senses eventually. But for me, the incident had been a wake-up call. I realized I had been operating from a place of shame and defensiveness for months. I had been so focused on what I had lost, my job, my sense of purpose, my financial contribution, that I had failed to see what I was building. That morning, after Sarah left for work, I sat down at my laptop with a fresh cup of coffee and took stock of my life. I made a list of everything I had accomplished in the past 6 months. I had learned 3 new programming languages and frameworks. I had built a portfolio website showcasing my projects. I had networked with dozens of people in my industry. I had maintained our home to an impressive standard. I had been there for Sarah in ways I never could have been when I was working 70-hour weeks at my old job. And most importantly, I had started that freelance web development project. The freelance work had begun as a small thing, a website for a local bakery, another for a friend's startup. But I had poured my heart into those projects, treating each one like it was for a Fortune 500 company. The results had been stunning, and word had been spreading. As I reviewed my email, I noticed something. I had been so focused on applying for traditional jobs that I hadn't fully appreciated the momentum my freelance work was gaining. I had 3 new project inquiries that week alone, each one offering more money than the last. That's when it hit me. Why was I trying so hard to get back into the corporate world when I could build something of my own? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had always dreamed of running my own business, but it had seemed like an impossible fantasy. Now, circumstances had forced me into a position where I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I spent that entire day researching business models, pricing strategies, and marketing approaches for a web development consultancy. By the time Sarah came home that evening, I had a preliminary business plan drafted. "What's this?" she asked, looking over my shoulder at the document on my screen. "An idea," I said, feeling a nervous excitement in my stomach. What if I stopped looking for jobs and instead focused entirely on building a freelance business? I could offer web development, design, and digital marketing services to small and medium-sized businesses. Sarah's eyes widened as she read through my plan. "Daniel, this is incredible. The numbers here, if you could actually achieve these projections." "I know it's risky," I interrupted. "And I know it might take a while to build up. But I think I can do this. I think I could actually build something significant." Sarah turned to me, and I saw pride shining in her eyes. "I believe in you," she said simply. "Let's do it." Over the next 3 months, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I woke up at 5:30 every morning and worked until Sarah came home. I took on every project I could handle, no matter how small. I reached out to old colleagues, posted on social media, joined business networking groups, and even cold emailed potential clients. The work was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in my career, I was building something that was entirely mine. Every client I landed, every website I built, every problem I solved, it all belonged to me. By the end of the second month, my income from freelance work had matched what I used to make at my old job. By the end of the third month, I had exceeded it by 30%. Sarah was amazed. "How are you doing this?" she asked one evening as we reviewed my earnings. "Honestly, desperation and determination," I laughed. "And maybe a little bit of proving a point." Sarah grew serious. "You're not doing this because of what my mom said, are you? Because you don't need to prove anything to her." "I'm not doing it for her," I said truthfully. "I'm doing it for me. For us. To prove to myself that I'm capable of more than I ever thought possible." As my business grew, I made a point to maintain the same level of care for our home and our relationship. I still made Sarah breakfast every morning. I still handled the household chores. I still cooked elaborate dinners. The difference was that now I was also running a successful business. During this time, Margaret had continued to stay away, though Sarah told me she called occasionally to ask when Sarah would come to her senses. Sarah had remained firm. Margaret could see us again when she was ready to apologize to me. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was working at my home office when my phone rang. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it. "Hello, is this Daniel Morrison?" a professional-sounding woman asked. "Yes, this is he. Mr. Morrison, my name is Jennifer Chen, and I'm a senior partner at Apex Consulting Group. We've been looking for someone to completely overhaul our digital presence, website, client portal, marketing automation, the works. Your name came highly recommended by 3 different people in our network. Would you be available to discuss a potential project?" My heart started racing. Apex Consulting Group was one of the largest business consulting firms in the state. A project with them could be worth 6 figures. "I would absolutely be available," I managed to say calmly. We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. When I told Sarah that evening, she literally jumped up and down with excitement. "Do you know what this means?" she said. "If you land this project, you'll have officially made it, Daniel. You'll have built a legitimate business from nothing." I tried to contain my excitement, knowing I hadn't landed the project yet. But deep down, I felt a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I knew I could deliver something exceptional for Apex. The weekend was a blur of preparation. I built a custom presentation showcasing my previous work, drafted a comprehensive proposal, and practiced my pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. Monday morning arrived. I put on my best suit, the one I used to wear to important meetings at my old job, and drove to Apex's downtown office. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed success and ambition. The meeting with Jennifer Chan and her team lasted for 3 hours. I presented my ideas for their digital transformation, answered technical questions, discussed timelines and pricing. By the end, I could tell they were impressed. "We'll be in touch by the end of the week," Jennifer said as we shook hands. But I didn't have to wait that long. The next morning, I received an email. Apex wanted to move forward with the project. The contract value was $175,000, with potential for ongoing work. I stared at the email for a full minute, unable to believe what I was reading. In less than 4 months, I had gone from unemployed and humiliated to landing the biggest project of my career. That evening, Sarah and I celebrated with champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant. As we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with a mischievous smile. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said. "What?" "It's time to talk to my mother." My stomach clenched. Despite all my success, the thought of facing Margaret again filled me with anxiety. "Do we have to?" Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to prove anything to her, Daniel. You've already proven everything that matters. But I think she needs to see what you've accomplished. And I think you need to say what you need to say to her. For closure, if nothing else." I thought about it for a long moment. Sarah was right. I had been carrying Margaret's words around like a weight for months. It was time to put that weight down. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's invite her over for dinner this weekend." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I'm sure. It's time." As we sat there in the fading light, I thought about the phrase I would say to Margaret. The phrase that would change everything. I didn't know it yet, but those words were already forming in my mind, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. Margaret arrived at our house that Saturday at exactly 6 o'clock. She was never late. Punctuality was one of her many ways of asserting control. I watched through the window as she got out of her silver Mercedes, her posture rigid, her expression guarded. Sarah had told her that I wanted to speak with her, that I had something important to share. Margaret had agreed to come, though Sarah said she detected skepticism in her mother's voice, as if this was some kind of intervention where Margaret would finally set me straight. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hello, Margaret," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She looked at me with those same cold eyes I remembered from the kitchen incident 4 months ago. "Daniel," she said curtly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Sarah greeted her mother with a hug that Margaret returned stiffly. We moved into the dining room, where I had prepared dinner, herb-roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and roasted vegetables. The table was set beautifully, with candles and our best dishes. Margaret's eyes swept over the scene, and I could see her assessing everything, looking for flaws, for evidence to support her preconceived notions about my inadequacy. We ate in uncomfortable silence for the first few minutes. Finally, Margaret set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Sarah said you wanted to discuss something with me," she said. "I assume this is about the incident in the kitchen. I hope you've come to understand that I was only trying to help, to motivate you to." "Margaret," I interrupted gently but firmly, "I didn't invite you here to listen to you justify what you said to me. I invited you here to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" She looked taken aback. Sarah reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of support. "I suppose," Margaret said, crossing her arms defensively. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been preparing for. When you told me that I was living at your expense, that I was a parasite, that I wasn't a real man because I didn't have a job. Do you remember saying those things? Margaret's face reddened slightly. I may have been harsh, but the underlying point was valid. "I asked you not to interrupt," I said calmly. "For months ago, your words hurt me more than you could possibly know. Not because they were true, but because they were so fundamentally unfair. You saw a man who had lost his job and assumed you knew the whole story. You assumed I was lazy, that I was taking advantage of your daughter, that I had given up." I paused, gathering my thoughts. Margaret sat frozen, her mouth pressed into a thin line. What you didn't see, I continued, was a man who was working harder than he had ever worked in his life. You didn't see the hundreds of job applications I filled out. You didn't see the skills I was learning, the projects I was building. You didn't see me waking up at dawn to make sure your daughter started every day with a good breakfast and emotional support. You didn't see me managing every aspect of our household so that Sarah could focus entirely on her career. You saw what you wanted to see because it fit the narrative you had already decided was true. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. For a long time, I let your words define me. I felt ashamed and inadequate. I questioned my worth as a husband and as a man. But then something changed. Your cruel words, as painful as they were, became fuel. They pushed me to stop seeking validation from traditional employment and instead to build something of my own. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printed copy of the contract with Apex Consulting Group. I slid it across the table to Margaret. For months ago, I had no income. Today, I run my own web development consultancy. Last month, I signed a contract with Apex Consulting Group, one of the largest firms in the state, for a project worth $175,000. That's just the beginning. I have a pipeline of work that will keep me busy for the next 18 months, with projected annual revenue that will exceed $300,000. Margaret's eyes widened as she scanned the document. I saw her hands tremble slightly. But here's the thing, Margaret, I said, my voice soft but steady. Even if I hadn't landed that contract, even if I was still unemployed, even if I never made another dollar in my life, your words would still have been wrong. Because my worth as a person, as a husband, as a man, was never dependent on my income. It was never dependent on my job title or my financial contribution to this household. I leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. The phrase that's going to change everything is this: I forgive you. Margaret's face crumpled. I saw confusion, then shame, then something that might have been grief flash across her features. I forgive you for the cruel things you said. I forgive you for judging me without knowing the full story. I forgive you for trying to make me feel worthless. But I want you to understand something. Forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to forget. It doesn't mean I'm going to pretend this didn't happen. It means I'm choosing not to carry your negativity with me anymore. Sarah was crying softly beside me, though she was smiling through her tears. Margaret, I continued, I don't need your approval or your validation. I don't need you to think I'm successful or worthy or man enough for your daughter. But what I do need, what Sarah needs, is for you to treat me with basic respect. Not because of what I've accomplished, but because I'm a human being who deserves dignity. For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. She stared at the contract in her hands, then at me, then at her daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was wrong, she said, and I could hear the effort it took for her to form those words. I was so wrong. Daniel, I don't know what to say. An apology would be a good start, Sarah said quietly. Margaret looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw genuine vulnerability in her eyes. I am deeply, truly sorry. I said horrible things to you. I judged you unfairly. I let my own prejudices and fears about financial security blind me to the kind of person you really are. She paused, wiping at her eyes with her napkin. The truth is, when I was young, my father lost his job, and our family fell apart. We lost everything. My mother blamed him, and eventually, they divorced. I watched my mother struggle for years. I promised myself I would never be in that position, and I raised Sarah to value financial stability above almost everything else. When you lost your job, all I could see was my father's failure. I projected all of that onto you, and that was profoundly unfair. I had not expected this level of honesty from Margaret. I saw Sarah looking at her mother with a mixture of surprise and compassion. I watched you these past few months, Margaret continued, her voice steadier now. Sarah would tell me about how you supported her, about the work you were doing. I told myself it wasn't enough, that it didn't matter. But the truth is, I was too proud to admit I had been wrong. Too proud to admit that you were proving to be exactly the kind of partner Sarah needed. Someone resilient, someone creative, someone who adapts and overcomes. She looked at the contract again. This is remarkable, Daniel. But what's more remarkable is that you're sitting here offering me forgiveness when you have every right to tell me to get out of your house and never come back. I thought about it, I admitted with a slight smile. But holding on to anger and resentment only hurts me. And at the end of the day, you're Sarah's mother. She loves you. I want my wife to have a relationship with her mother. But that relationship needs to be built on mutual respect. Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely now. You have my respect, Daniel. You've had it for a while now, even if I was too stubborn to show it. And you have my sincere apology. I hope that, in time, you can see that as more than just words. Sarah reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Mom, thank you. That means everything. We finished dinner in a much lighter atmosphere. Margaret asked questions about my business, about the Apex project, about my future plans. She listened, really listened, in a way she never had before. As the evening wore on, I saw glimpses of the woman Sarah had always described to me. Intelligent, passionate, even warm when she allowed herself to be. As Margaret was leaving that night, she paused at the door and turned to me. Daniel, there's something I want you to know. When Sarah first brought you home to meet me, I liked you immediately. You were kind, you made my daughter laugh. You clearly adored her. But then my old fears kicked in, and I started looking for reasons to doubt you. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on seeing people for who they really are, not through the lens of my past. That's all any of us can do, I said. Keep working on ourselves, keep trying to be better. She hugged me then, a real hug, not the stiff, obligatory ones from before. Thank you for forgiving me, she whispered. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it. After she left, Sarah and I stood in the doorway, watching her car pull away. That was incredible, Sarah said, leaning into me. I've never seen my mother like that. So vulnerable, so honest. You gave her a gift tonight, Daniel. We gave each other a gift, I said. She gets to shed the weight of her prejudices and fears. I get to shed the weight of her judgment and my own insecurities. And you get to have both of us in your life without having to choose between us. How did you know? Sarah asked. How did you know that forgiveness was the right approach? I thought about it for a moment. Because holding on to anger was exhausting. Because I realized that her cruelty came from her own pain, not from any truth about who I am. And because I learned something important these past few months. The only person whose validation I truly need is my own. Once I had that, her opinion of me lost its power. That night, as Sarah and I got ready for bed, I thought about the journey I had been on. For months ago, I had stood in that kitchen, humiliated and broken, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Tonight, I stood as a successful business owner, a loving husband, and a man who had learned to forgive not just others but himself. The phrase, "I forgive you," had changed everything. It had freed me from the prison of resentment. It had opened the door for Margaret to confront her own demons. It had allowed our family to heal and move forward. But more than that, it had taught me something profound. True strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you choose to stand back up. It's about transforming pain into purpose, using criticism as fuel rather than letting it become poison. It's about maintaining your dignity and humanity even when others try to strip it away. As I drifted off to sleep that night, with Sarah's head resting on my chest and the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had been tested and had emerged stronger. I had been judged and had proven my worth. Not to anyone else, but to myself. The story didn't end there, of course. Life never wraps up that neatly. My business continued to grow, eventually requiring me to hire a small team. Margaret slowly worked on rebuilding her relationship with both of us, attending Sunday dinners and even occasionally admitting when she was wrong about something. Sarah and I grew even closer, our bond strengthened by having weathered this storm together. But whenever I'm asked about the turning point in my life, about the moment when everything changed, I always come back to that kitchen confrontation and the choice I made in its aftermath. Not the choice to build a business or to prove Margaret wrong, but the choice to forgive. The choice to release the weight of judgment and shame. The choice to define myself by my own standards rather than by the narrow, fearful standards others tried to impose on me. That choice, more than any contract or business success, was what truly set me free. And in setting myself free, I had inadvertently freed Margaret as well, giving her the space to confront her own fears and become a better person. In the end, we all learned the same lesson. Worth cannot be measured by income or job titles or financial contributions. Worth is measured by character, by resilience, by how we treat others and ourselves. And on that measure, I finally understood, I had always been enough.